Hello, it is so lovely to be with you this morning, still morning. I'm Daniele Behn Smith. I'm Etchodene on my dad's side. We're from Fort Nelson First Nation up in the northeastern part of what we call British Columbia. On my mom's side, I'm Métis with family roots in southeastern Manitoba, raised in Winnipeg. I live here on Lekwungen Tanakh. I'm an occupier of these territories with my family, my husband Quinn, our two kiddos, Lucy and Maeve, and our little black dog. I'm a cisgendered straight lady, and I use she, her pronouns. And yeah, as was just mentioned, I get to work at the Office of the Provincial Health Officer, and I'm so lucky to be joined with my friend today, who will now introduce herself.
Nicole, Jules. I am Sukham on my dad's side. His name is Rod Jules, and I'm Intlakokmuk on my mom's side. Her name is Dorothy Monroe. I'm so excited to be here today. Very, very grateful for the opportunity. I'm from Sukham territory in Castelnac, otherwise known as Adams Lake, but right now I'm living in Malahat Nation Hulkaminam territory, which is where I traveled in from today. And I'm a cisgendered woman who uses she, her pronouns. And I'm so thankful I get to work in the Office of the Provincial Health Officer as a junior policy analyst in the Indigenous Youth Internship Program for the next little while. So yeah, Cooksjem, that's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicole. So we don't do this work alone that we're going to be sharing this morning. We do it with a team of incredible humans, some of whom are listed here on our title slide. I was really, really honored and privileged to have the invitation to come and join you this morning. I really want it to be afternoon already. And it's so nice to see so many friends and colleagues in the space and friends that I haven't met yet. When I was thinking about this and preparing and coming over, I thought about public health and how as a community we position ourselves as being quite benevolent, sometimes quite righteous, quite paternalistic at times. And so what we're here to share today is about some of the work we've been doing in the Office of the Provincial Health Officer to be very disciplined about seeing the ways in which by adopting the status quo public health ways of being and doing, we insidiously uphold Indigenous specific racism and systemic white supremacy. So we've been working really hard to unlearn and undo those things, and that's what we want to share a little bit with you today. We have a huge slide deck, so we're not going to go through all the slides. We'll go through a few of them, and then you are welcome to have the whole deck in case you're interested to hear a little bit more about what we've been busy with. So First Nations territories stretch to every inch of this province. Our inherent rights are rooted in connection to our lands and waters, and they've never been ceded or surrendered. Our inherent rights are affirmed in international, national, and provincial law. We have our own long-standing First Nations laws and systems that are tied to our lands and waters. And as an office, at the Office of the PHO, we also know that there are other Indigenous people who now live in BC as well, including Métis, Inuit, and First Nations whose homelands are elsewhere in Canada. And we hold specific obligations to uphold their inherent rights to health and wellness as well. We have guiding principles that really, really help us when we get stuck in this hard, messy work, which happens often. We come back to these principles. So truth comes before reconciliation. We acknowledge that systemic white supremacy is an everyday problem that requires our everyday attention to arrest, unlearn, and undo. We endeavor to be humble. So we are definitely not experts in this area. We are learners, and we are always keen to learn from others as well. We endeavor to have open hearts and open minds. Sometimes that's hard when you're fed up with the nonsense. We wrap ourselves, each other, and everyone doing this work in love and care, because it's hard heart work. And so we're really so blessed that Kate Youngblood, a white occupier that is a part of our team, has gifted us this blanket as a symbol that reminds us about wrapping one another in love and care, and this was quilted by her late mom, Jen Gate. We like to share the lessons that we're learning, so we're always so thrilled to have an invitation to talk about the work. We err on the side of Indigenous rights and Indigenous people. We try to do our homework. We'll tell you more about what that looks like. No one should have to do this work alone, hence our big team. We have a willingness to own and fix harms that we identify, and there are many, many, many. And we endeavor to privilege perspectives of BC First Nations, other Indigenous people, and Black and other racialized people in the work. We essentially ground ourselves in these two frameworks and approaches. So when we started the work in the fall of 2021, Kate was joining the office to do her postdoc fellowship with us, Kate Youngblood. And so she brought forward Dr. Kamara Jones's Science and Practice of Anti-Racism framework, which names these three tasks: name racism, ask how it's operating here, organize and strategize to act. So that is essentially how we framed and conceptualized the earliest days of this work. As we moved along, Puglas Jody Wilson-Raybould, who Nicole got to meet just last week, which was so exciting. I was able to continue my stalking vicariously through my team. I believe that JW and I are like best friends because she read her book to me through the audiobook. So I think that we're very close, and I quote her every day, like multiple times a day. So if you're listening, I love you. So Jody published this book, True Reconciliation, and she names three core practices: learn, understand, act. And so we were able to seamlessly bring those together with Dr. Kamara Jones's instructions as well, and they really fit nicely. So that's how we approach our work, and we're going in this continuous process of doing these tasks in different areas of our work. So Kate has provided a really, really helpful net metaphor for settler colonialism. So what you see on the screen here is an art installation that was part of a TED conference on unceded Musqueam, Squamish to Tsleil-Waututh territories in 2014. And when Kate saw this installation, it struck her that it could be a very apt metaphor for settler colonialism. That there is a net that stretches across this entire nation that entangles and keeps First Nations and Métis and Inuit people suspended high above our ancestral territories, that prevents us from exercising our full and inherent rights, prevents us from having the freedom to be ourselves. These major guy wires that you see, Kate thought, are things that are visible to the naked eye, things that many of us know about: the Indian Act, the residential school system. But they're so big that it's hard for any of us to imagine what role do we play in dismantling those big, huge systems. But what's really important about this metaphor is that actually what keeps this net firmly in place are these thousands upon thousands of colonial knots. There are these small, very significant, sometimes large, instances of Indigenous specific racism that show up in our everyday work. Kate shared these two images with us because for her, she also saw that this metaphor really brings into stark relief that this is a system of segregation, that as settler Canadians walking along the seawall or in the buildings surrounding the net, during the daytime, this net would be almost invisible. You'd have to actively look to appreciate that it was there. At nighttime, it was illuminated, and so it took up the whole sky and captured everybody's attention. And so for Kate, that brought images of Orange Shirt Day. Collectively, we pay attention. Well, it wasn't a revelation. The news and media reporting around the 215 at Kamloops the truth that those families and communities knew and had already told, but that news caught everybody's attention, and there was sort of a collective gasp. Oh my God, this is horrifying. What can we do? And the news cycle continues and it recedes and the net becomes again invisible and settlers carry on unaware. Kate shared this final image just to really draw attention to the fact that it's not Janet Echelman, the artist of this particular installation, that's up there putting the net in place and keeping it up there. This is everyday people doing their everyday jobs who are a part of keeping all those colonial knots well in place. We just had a great conversation at the back table about hiring practices into government, right? Riddled with colonial knots. So this has become a very helpful metaphor for our team because it allows us to collectively name colonial knots and gaze on them together and then be able to move forward because it gives us this common language. And now I'll invite Nicole up.
So we wanted to share this painting with you today by a powerful Cree artist, Kent Monkman. It's called The Daddies, and it's a recreation of Robert Harris's Fathers of Confederation. Harris was commissioned by Ottawa to create a painting that honors the Charlottetown Conference, which was one of the 3 conferences that ultimately led to the Confederacy of Canada. When Kent Monkman saw the original, he was struck by the foreground, which included an empty footstool, which he subsequently occupied with his alter ego, Mischief Eagle Testicle. He saw an opportunity to draw attention to and illuminate the absence and deliberate exclusion of Indigenous peoples in this pivotal moment in Canadian history. We were excluded from this moment in Canadian history because of epistemological differences and the widely held belief that Western European ways of knowing and being are superior to that of Indigenous peoples. There was a prevailing ideology of white supremacy, and given the absence of women in this painting, also the ideology of misogyny. Monkman's image cheekily displays the truth displays the truth that white supremacy is the foundation and the bedrock of the systems and structures that govern our everyday lives. I'm pleased to think that nobody in here holds the personal belief that non-Indigenous people are superior to Indigenous people. However, in our everyday lives, in our socially constructed settler society, this belief is so deeply embedded that it continues to manifest as gross disparities in every indicator that we can count, including the indicators of our leadership. Cool. So we can reconcile the whiteness of leaders in Canada, BC, and in health to reflect one of 2 truths. One, that non-Indigenous people are superior to Indigenous people and are more capable of holding these positions. But we've just agreed for that to not be true. So in fact, this reflects 2, that deeply embedded ideologies of white supremacy and racism that were the foundation of the country of Canada continue to confer unearned advantage on a narrow segment of the population and confer unearned disadvantage on Indigenous, Black, and people of color. Kuksham. I'll hand it back to Daniele.
I feel like such a proud auntie when I get to listen to Nicole drop all those truth bombs. This is wild, right? Like, this truth is so wild. Occasionally I get invited to go to the Ministry of Health senior executive team. I am going to start bringing sunglasses because it's blinding and it's uncomfortable for everybody when we talk about this, which we do. That's the whole reason I get invited to go there. So it's just true. These are a couple of graphs that are taken from the First Nations Population Health and Wellness Agenda, which is a collaboration between First Nations Health Authority and our office. And so the point of this graph is not to reiterate that disparities exist. You can look at life expectancy, you can look at education, you can pick any indicator, right? The point of sharing these graphs with you today is to once again name this grotesque truth that even though nobody holds this stated ideological belief of white supremacy and Indigenous specific racism anymore, the truth is we have all been socialized and educated to know that this is correct, to know that this is right. And I know that because every so often we have data analysts that might put the data in backwards, and the graph might come out and it might say that status Indians live longer than other residents, and immediately everybody jumps on it. Oh, this can't be right. This must have been put in incorrectly because this says that status Indians are doing better than other residents. So that's something that we hold, right? It's these two things are true. We state that we are anti-racist, and yet we hold deeply these racist beliefs. The other really important takeaway from these slides, and I'm so sorry that I missed your presentation, Hannah, because I just caught the Q&A and it sounded awesome. So I will go back and watch it. But there was a great question about strengths-based versus deficit-based. And we do a very, very harmful and insidious thing in the way that we talk about data. We conflate Indigenous identity with risk. We conflate that as being an exposure to a risk factor because we say things such as, well, we say status First Nations, but really it's status Indians. Status Indians have a shorter life expectancy than other residents. I'm saying it's status Indians because we do these analyses based on a First Nations client file, which is part of the Indian registry matching. So just as a background context. We say things like Indigenous students are less likely to complete high school than non-Indigenous students, right? And we're identifying Indigenous identity as the risk. And our identity as Dene, as Michif, as Secwepmich, as Tunacha, as Tlingit, as Inuk, that's what gives us strength and resilience. What confers risk on us is being subjected to Canadian colonial practices and policies, which is super bad for our health, for our education, for our determinants of health. And so I think part of this, I actually am having such a hard time even now with this whole idea of strengths-based and deficit-based. What are we measuring? Like, we just need to be so much more specific about what this data is actually telling us. It's telling us that Indigenous kids get pushed out of the education system at alarming rates, right? That's what it's telling us. So I think that distinction between strengths-based and deficit-based really has to do with what is the story we're telling. Ooh, I'm gonna speed up, guys. So to be clear, we picked up this work and we're doing this work not because we're good people, not because we're moral people, not because we're righteous people. We have legal obligations as a health system, as all settler Canadians to do this work. We have treaties, we have, I've got my friend Asad in the back who's loving that I'm drawing attention to his presence right now. A legal scholar. We have the Constitution, we have multiple Supreme Court rulings, we have UNDRIP law at the federal and provincial levels. We have a framework. So the commissioners from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission named UNDRIP as the framework for reconciliation. We have hundreds upon hundreds of specific, detailed instructions about what we need to do yesterday. Like, I'm so, fed up with the idea that we need to talk to more Indigenous people to start being anti-racist. That's nonsense. Absolutely, you need to partner with us in good ways, but you also need to do your homework. So this is what this is about. I'm kind of fired up today because I was having an exchange with a university that shall remain unnamed. It wasn't here. So I'm fired up. So our work is in this orange bucket, and it's about taking actions, about organize and strategize to act, to just get busy with the work we've already been told we need to do. This has been so helpful to us, this insight that came to us through the work, for quite a long time. So I've been working in the field of Indigenous health for over 20 years now. And for the last 5 or 10 years, this language of Indigenous health I've found makes my harm alarms ring. And I couldn't really put a name on it. I couldn't figure it out. It's in my job title. And I was like, this doesn't sit quite right. And anyway, through conversations, we realized together that part of the reason it makes my harm alarms ring is that for a very, very long time, these two separate buckets of work have been kind of jumbled up all together under this term of Indigenous health, and then saddled on the shoulders of one Indigenous person, maybe 2 Indigenous people in a small team in an organization. But there are actually these separate buckets of work that need to be carried out by different people in service to advancing the health and wellness of Indigenous people and advancing true reconciliation. So this birch bark basket, which comes from Treaty 8 territory from the Fort Liard region, is used to represent our work as First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And this is very heavy, hard heart work of cultural continuity, of resisting genocide, of keeping our languages and our cultures and our ceremonial practices going, of carrying out our sacred responsibilities to our more than human relatives, and meeting colonial knot upon colonial knot in our efforts to do our basket work. On the other side of the screen is a copper pot that comes from our colleague Kate's Great Opaz machine shop in Holland. And it sits on her mantle, now it sits in her office on unceded Musqueam territory. And so we use this as a symbol of settler work in service to advancing true reconciliation. And this is also heavy, hard heart work of eradicating systemic white supremacy, of eradicating Indigenous-specific racism, of doing the hard, painful work of doing that self-reflection. And absolutely, it needs to be done with guidance from First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, but the heavy lifting is settler work. We were gifted with a really important teachings. When we started using this metaphor, we don't have any Anishinaabe members on our team. And so we didn't know about the sacred Anishinaabe teachings about copper pots. So Elder Phyllis Williams from Curve Lake First Nation shared some teachings with us and gave us permission to speak to them when we are presenting this slide. And so what Elder Williams shared with us is that copper pots are sacred vessels. They are revered and used in ceremony for their healing and purifying properties. You can put in dirty water and it will be cleansed and purified. When she shared those teachings, it really gave me goosebumps because it made me realize, going back to that initial slide, there are teachings, laws, medicines on these territories that can hold this settler work in the utmost love and care. You need to do your homework. Ooh, love and care. Perfect timing. Just a reminder that these are hard conversations. So this, like I say, is the turbo version of our presentation. So I'm just going to share this and one other thing. So how we frame doing our homework, as I mentioned earlier, is following those 3 core tasks and practices. So asking ourselves, what have we done to learn from the original inhabitants of these lands and waters? And we are always endeavoring to start from a place-based orientation and location, because public health is so good at erasing us from our own territories. We are erased across public health documents, reports, work. So we try not to do that. We try and understand what has to be done in relation to those foundational obligations that we have in TRC, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, Two-Spirit, LGBTQIA+ calls for justice in plain sight. And then we try and act in ways that challenge, elevate, and advance true reconciliation. Again, words from our dear Puglass Jody Wilson-Raybould. And Jody offered these 2 very helpful questions that we come back to on a daily basis, which is, are the actions that we're taking, do they require courage, and do they lead to uncomfortable change? If they don't, we're not there yet, and we need to keep pushing. So we're in a constant state of discomfort, which is good. I'm just gonna very quickly tell you about some of the things that we've learned about stopping white supremacy and Indigenous specific racism in the Office of the PHO. And then I'm gonna fast forward to a slide that just has sort of a list of some of the specific things we've been doing. And if there's anything that jumps out at you that's of interest, you can ask me about it. We're here after we finish talking for a while too. So, starting conversations with our grounding principles brings a sacredness to the work, and it really helps us to, like I say, find a good way forward when we get stuck, which is often. We start conversations with the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples because it's important and effective in shifting the tone. Colonial knots are everywhere. Once you start using this metaphor, you'll see them literally everywhere. When we went out and asked our team about their knowledge and use of foundational obligations in their work, it was extremely variable. So some of our team members were engaging with those foundational obligations routinely. Other people on our team had never even heard of some of them, including in plain sight, which is specific to BC's health system. When we asked our team members what were the things that made it possible for them to pick up this work, they talked about enabling leadership. And so Dr. Bonnie Henry is incredible. In this space, she's been an incredible white woman co-conspirator and accomplice because she uses this language. Government has a real coating of Teflon when it comes to the language of white supremacy. They do not like it. They do not want to see it written formal documents. They don't want to hear it for the most part, despite it being so true. Bonnie uses this language, and then she immediately says that out loud, and then she says, that makes me uncomfortable. But as a settler, I don't have a right to comfort. Right to safety, sure. Right to comfort, no. So she's awesome. It was pointed out to us that this happens to fall on the middle finger. So in our office, this is like an endearing symbol of love and care. We're like, everybody should be like Bonnie. Operational support, this is an area that we're actually navigating, having a gap there, because we had the benefit of Kate Youngblood on our team for 2 years, and she was the engine for this work. We are in the process, government is slow, so we're in the process of trying to figure out how do we permanently staff having somebody who's doing this full time in an engine capacity. And our team really, really, really wants to be doing things in a good way. They really, really, really want to be making things right. And they said, I need more specific guidance. Like, I know there are hundreds of detailed directions, but what does that mean for me as a policy analyst or a data analyst or an admin staff, right? Because people kind of think, oh, that's not my work because I'm not like in the Indigenous health team. So we've done a lot of work together to create that clear guidance. And our team is awesome. They stand up in the most incredible ways. This is the part I often cry. I introduce myself with my slavey name of Azezan, which means crying all the time. And this is the part that's gonna make me cry because they show up in these incredible ways that just create so much cultural safety for me and our Indigenous teammates. So I've seen a couple of examples of that this week, which is why I'm emotional about it right now. So I'm going to just leave this slide up, if that's okay. I don't know for the people that are online, if they prefer to not have to see the slide, but just so that you can see, these are some of the things that we've been busy with. These are all accessible, or many of them are accessible on a tab on the Office of the PHO website if you want to go in and see things. Oh no, that one isn't up there, so I can circulate that. I was just going to draw your attention to number 11, foundational, we call it obligations now, cheat sheet. So one of the first things, earliest things that Kate helped us do in her engine capacity was just put all of those hundreds and hundreds of detailed directions into an Excel spreadsheet. So now we can quickly do a quick Control F and find the topic that we are working on so that we can quickly add those into our documents, our briefing notes, and just center those obligations. And we do that often to the conversation we were having in the back around recruitment and retention, because that was an area that we were demonstrating excellence at keeping Indigenous people out. We managed to keep it to just one for over a decade until we really started to dig in and untie some of those colonial knots. So Masi Cho, Marcy, thank you so much for all of the work that you have done, all of the work you are doing and will be doing, and for the time here today, just for us to really think about that need to be consistent, conscientious, coherent, and really disciplined about bringing that North Star of eradicating Indigenous specific racism to everything we do in public health, because if we don't, we absolutely continue to perpetuate harms. And I know that's counter to what's in people's hearts. So Masi Cho, thank you so much. I will invite Nicole maybe up here so that we can field questions together.